Howdy, folks. Happy Wednesday. Happy hump day. We've got a lot of things to discuss today, and we'll get to that in a moment, but we'll start with the pre-show. Go ahead, Russ.
Okay. So I'm going to start with a story that will morph into Major League Baseball. It'll start with me, though, and tough because I do this segment. In my 40s, I tried out. There was a friend of mine told me, hey, the New Haven Cutters are trying out players for semi-pro baseball. I know you're pretty good at baseball. Why don't you go try out? And I thought about it, and I'm like, yeah, I have a little George Plimpton in me. Let me go do this because I have a website and, I can get some good content and it'll be fun. And he's going to take photographs and sure, why not? I'm always willing to put myself out there. So I go and do it. And, lo and behold, I make the first cut, which was, surprising even to me because I hadn't played hardball since I was like 14 years old. I'd just been playing softball for the last, 30 something years. And so I make the first cut, we go and eat and they basically say, all right, you're going to be in a simulated game. And I'm like, okay. So as I'm getting ready to bat in this simulated game, the guys on the team say, hey, Russ, and they knew I was the old guy. Like the next oldest guy, I was like in my 40s. The next guy, oldest guy was probably like 30. And they liked me just because I was able to, pull some things off. And so they said, listen, when this guy digs in his glove, he's throwing a splitter. And I said, okay. In my first at bat, I fouled a few off, and then I ended up either fouling out or grounding out kind of meekly. And that second time up, though, I actually hit a really good shot in the hole because I saw him digging in his glove, and at least I had an idea of what the location was going to be. And I ended up only running halfway, and the coach is like yelling, why'd you stop? And I'm like, because it's a simulated game. I didn't think we were actually playing. He goes, no, get on first. You got a base hit. And I'm like, hey, great. But the point of this story is Aaron Judge is kind of getting blamed now for cheating. But really, he's just doing what guys in that game at that level do and every other level do. And Michael explained it.
Well, this is the hilarious thing, Kev, is and it started on Monday night with Aaron Judge in a blowout game by the Yankees. They were, I think, up 6-0 at the time. And he looked into the New York dugout, glanced, and Aaron Boone had been kicked out of the game for arguing balls and strikes. Judge looks into the dugout. He said after the game that it was because people were chirping the ump. People think that was just a BS thing that he was covering for them, sort of giving him signals about location of the pitch. Basically, the catcher was moving inside or outside, and they were signaling to him. He hits a home run. After the game, there was a lot of I think it was Dan Schulman and Buck Martinez were saying, what was he looking at in the dugout? Was somebody shooting him signals? And I'm like, okay, but that's not illegal. That's the gamesmanship that we've seen. If a batter, if a base runner is on at second base and he can see the signs and he signals to the batter what the sign is, that's part of the game. That's not banging on trash cans. And now yesterday, it got to the point where they were arguing with the first base coach, Rojas, former Met manager Rojas, because he was outside of the coach's box, and they think he was sending signals. So, I mean, this is being sort of the accusations here are being held almost akin to what the Astros did when this is just the normal gamesmanship of baseball. And it's hilarious how it's gotten to this point.
Yeah, I mean, when we were kids, you always tried to sense where the catcher was, kind of setting up just to kind of know where the pitch was going to come. But, I don't get too excited about any of that. It's still hard. You still have to hit the ball.
Yeah.
It helps to kind of know whether he was throwing you a slider or it was going to be a four-seam fastball, but you still got to hit it. You got to hit it perfectly on the screws, and so be it. But yeah, I understand Aaron Judge being upset by that. I really do. So
Yeah, I mean, just going back to me, that guy was throwing like 88, right? That's what the splitter was because they told me what it was. That first time up, even though I had an idea, I still had trouble with it. I still needed a second time up just to get any kind of good wood on it.
Yeah.
And so, I do understand it. Like, even this week, Kev, I saw Lindor and Alonso whispering in the ears of Brett Beatty, a young guy they brought up 2 weeks ago to play third base. They were clearly telling him stuff like, hey, look for this, look for that. And that goes on every game.
Yeah, I mean, it goes on every at bat. You face the pitcher for the first time, and guy whips, and as he's walking by, he goes to the guy on and he goes, "Watch that slider, it's wicked."
Right.
And it's what we did when we were kids. They're still doing what we did when we were kids.
Yes.
When you always sort of helped your teammates with what was going on. So,
by the way, Russ threw in a George Plimpton reference, and probably most of the people watching don't know what that is. George Plimpton was a writer. He wrote a book called Paper Lion, and I'm sure Kevin is well aware of that book. I'm pretty sure it was a preseason game, and he played quarterback, and I saw the movie. Alan Alda played Plimpton,
right?
And I think that's how Alex Karras got the start of his acting career. Was he was in Paper Lion, and he also played goaltender for the Boston Bruins. Yep. In a preseason game. I don't know if he ever played baseball. I don't remember if he ever played in
No, he just did the whole Sid Finch hoax. He wrote about that.
He did the Sid Finch hoax.
Yeah.
Right.
I just saw by the way, on that Sid Finch thing, I saw the video of when they ran a guy out named, Sid Finch was on his uniform.
Yeah,
the first time I had ever seen that video.
Yeah, I don't know if I've ever seen the video. I remember the picture. I can picture the SI cover to this day. I knew it was something I had to read, even though I knew it was probably bogus because I was already a teenager. But I had to read it because I'm a Met fan, and I was like, all right.
I just speaking of sports books, and then I have something to add to Russ's baseball story. But even though that happened in Detroit, and I did read the book, and I certainly enjoyed it, and of course I knew the characters because Alex Karras was featured prominently in it, and just the whole idea. I was already going to games by then, so it was kind of that was my team. I don't even think that book comes close to matching the significance of Ball 4.
No.
Jim Bowden. Like not even remotely, even though it might have a bigger reputation because there was a movie.
I think Ball 4 changed the world.
It did, yeah. It certainly changed me. I mean, it's the first look we ever had of what goes on inside a clubhouse.
Yeah.
And I mean, we didn't see any of that before. Like we didn't, I mean, there were people surprised that ball players swore, you know what I mean? Like that's how revealing it was. But anyway, I was going to bring this up, and I think it sort of fits. I know people don't appreciate the fact that we talk about other sports, but I know people know who Bob Duff is. He was Ask the Duffer in the Hockey News. He is my colleague now at Detroit Hockey Now, but he was a columnist for the Windsor Star for 25 years. He's one of the leading historians. He's written 20-some books on hockey. He knows everything about it. But what people don't know is that when Bob was young, he was a rugby player. Now, Bob is now 62 years old. And Bob is now playing rugby in a senior league, in a city to city league. Like he's playing.
I applaud him
for the Windsor. And if anybody knows anything about rugby, that is a tough sport.
Oh yeah.
Like he played 20 minutes in the last game, had 3 or 4 tackles. Now he's 62 years old.
Now I do say this with all due respect, Kev. That's how you know he's not married, though, because if I went and tried to do that, my wife would look at me and say, "There's a limit. You are not doing that."
Yeah. But I mean, I think that's the thing that's, there's some sports that you could sort of hang out at, and even in hockey, like you don't always necessarily have to get hit.
Right.
You know what I mean? So, but in rugby, you got to hit, so.
Rugby scares me. I was asked to play it in college because they saw how aggressive I was playing flag football. And I was like, no rugby for me.
Yeah. So anyway, my wife went and I went and watched him play, and I'm going to go see him play his thing. But he is the oldest registered rugby player in Canada.
That's awesome. I applaud him.
Yeah. It's an amazing thing. He's started to work to get himself in shape, but and he's one of those. I forget what they're called, but maybe some Canadians are listening to him. But he's the guy that's the lead guy in the scrum.
I wouldn't know.
He gets in the middle of all that and do all that.
We'll
So
just call him
anybody who follows the hockey exploits of Bob Duff, because he also was a goalie too, but he's now playing competitive rugby again for the Windsor Rogues, I think is the name of his team. So,
See, Russ, the voice that the voice of your wife is with me is since I'm not married is substituted by the voice inside my head saying, "No effing way am I playing rugby."
Yeah.
So,
I mean, because I do things. I play softball. I actually tried out with the U.S. luge team, and I was on a luge. And this is about when I was just about 50. I did a luge on land, and it was going at about 40 miles an hour. And they were like, "Hey, you were great. We gave you the fastest sled. I don't know if you know that, so you could write about it. Do you want to go again?" And I was like, "No, I lived through this one. I'm done. Like, that's it. I'm not going again."
Sorry. No, if
I just don't have that in me.
I don't plan on ever skydiving, but if I ever do, it'll be once, and that'll be it. I'll never do it again. So
I would be the same way.
Yeah.
I interviewed a World War II paratrooper early in my career, and I said that first jump had to be so difficult. He said, "It's not the first one you make; it's the last one."
Mm-hmm.
That's what he told me. He said after the war was winding down, he had to make one more jump, and he said it scared the living right out of me.
Plus, they're doing it at night too, which is insane.
Yeah.
Oh, some of them, and just think the parachutes that they used in World War II are not like the ones today.
They're inferior.
You're coming down where if you land the wrong way, you're gonna shatter both your legs.
Yeah.
So I mean, my uncle was in the precursor of the CIA. He was in the OSS, and he parachuted into Italy because our family's of obviously Italian background, and he spoke Italian. So he went in before the U.S. invaded Sicily in 1943, and it was part of organizing sort of the underground. And he had to parachute into rocky terrain with these parachutes where you're coming down at a pretty good rate of speed. It's not like it was today. I mean, now it'd be almost a joyride, but no, thank you. Anyway, no thanks. All right, let's start the show. Hello, Hockey World. Today is Wednesday, May 17th, 2023.
Hold on. I'm Russ Cohen from Sportsology.
I'm Kevin Allen. I really didn't have to look to figure that out. So,
and I'm Michael Agello, and this is the HockeyBuzzcast here on HockeyBuzz.com. That was from a request from somebody in the chat who said Mike has to show the sign because the vote in Tempe, Arizona occurred last night, and as Russ predicted, and as
Kevin agreed.
Kevin, sorry, didn't mean to exclude, and as I suspected, being Arizona, but it's a a state that is not a big fan of taxes. They voted down. The city of Tempe voted down. I think the final percentage was 56 to 44, or
there's 12% difference.
Yeah, 56 to 44. They voted down all three propositions for the entertainment venue in Tempe, which included the arena that the Coyotes aspired to occupy. And now, Kev, I mean, just over the last 12 to 14 hours, when that vote came down, the reaction of the league, the reaction of people in Arizona, the reaction of players. I mean, I saw Clayton Keller. Clayton Keller's dad came out and says, "Well, we won't be playing in Arizona next season." Not that he knows any inside information, but just give me first of all your overall reaction to this.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think this was a really difficult day for Gary Bettman. He has tried his darndest to try to keep that team in Arizona. There's a lot of logic for that in terms of completing kind of the Western schematic that they had. If you look at where Arizona is in relation to Vegas and to LA, there's a, keeping those teams kind of all together. The geography was good. But it's just never worked. They've never had the right ownership. Somebody ran a tweet where they listed all the owners, and it was just all like there's never been anyone that went in there that had it all together. And each of the owners was trying to find a bargain and trying to make money on it and all that. And then plus the teams haven't been good. Not since the days of Roenick and Kachuk. And that group, have they really been a team that sort of everyone got behind? So For a variety of reasons, it hasn't worked. And then the geography of where the arena was, I don't know why that's a big deal. I find that, I mean, it's hard to get to any arena.
No arena is like next to your house.
Yeah, it's, it requires just some work. But apparently, I'm told from people who live there that this is a particularly difficult to get to Glendale. So
well, it's okay, and I know this because I had a friend who lived in Scottsdale, and I insisted that we go to, when the Leafs were playing against the Coyotes, that we go to that game. And the drive from Scottsdale to Glendale, Scottsdale is west of Phoenix, Glendale is east of Phoenix. You have to go through the city. There's no highway that goes around it. You have to go through it. And it was a 45 to 50-minute drive.
Which is my drive to go to Joe Louis.
Right. I mean, it's a 2-hour trek between driving and train for me to go up to Toronto for the Leafs. But, I'm a reporter and that's my job. Whereas we're talking about fans. And, if you're a season ticket holder and you're doing it 41 times a year, that could be a pain. Now, the thing is, I think it is a hot potato, Kev, because, they say, well, all the people who go to hockey games are, based in Scottsdale. And then you move the building to Scottsdale and then they'll say, well, they're in Glendale. You know what I'm saying? It's like,
yeah, no, I understand. Yeah. Yeah, but I mean, that's not really why it failed. I think it just failed because they really never had the right ownership, the right team. It
all didn't hit it the right way it's supposed to for a franchise. Like, I agree. The thing is, though, Kev, I've been looking because, now rather than saying Houston, which again, I've been looking into Houston for a while, and the only negative was they were having trouble finding an owner that wanted to pay rent rather than have their own building, right? And,
the league doesn't want that. They do not want to be the number 2 tenant.
Well, I mean, again, okay, so is it better to be no matter – actually, I'm going to preface that. No matter what, for the next 2 or 3 years, they're going to be the number 2 tenant, whether it's in Salt Lake or it's in Houston. No matter what, you're the number 2 tenant, and Houston has a lot more seating capacity than Salt Lake and a lot better TV.
I'm not convinced that that's what they feel their options are. I mean, what do you base that on? Just the buzz, or?
No, that's the buzz. Now I'm going to go back to, and again, if I'm choosing between the two, I'm choosing Houston because the TV market's more of a match. As an example, the NBA All-Star Game, when it was recently on in Salt Lake, was the lowest rated one ever. They don't have a good TV market there. They don't.
Yeah. Well, I just right off the bat, I'm saying I'm not convinced that's right now what the conversation is in the NHL office. That it's Salt Lake
I'm agreeing with you. I'm agreeing.
Okay, all right. I'm just saying.
But I did hear this. I remember you saying.
What, before we go down the other venues road, because I want to stick with Phoenix right now because I meant what I mentioned to you.
I'm sticking with Phoenix. This was actually going to be about you.
Okay. Darren Drager reported this morning, of course, after the vote, after everybody's talking about the fact that, now they're going to move. Now, all of a sudden, the owner of the Phoenix Suns is, now there's a talk about them. If there was talk about this, it would have happened before. Is this like a
No. We talked about this before. I brought it up too because I had heard that from people who matter that this was really in the back of everyone's mind. But the idea was they really wanted the arena, so they didn't really want to bring this option out because some people would say, well, then just go do that so we don't end up with another new arena.
Right. I did hear once, Kev, and I think you even said it once, that they might even relook at the old America West thing one more time.
Yeah.
To try and I think that is something they will look at because there's one thing that is pretty clear to me with this ownership. This ownership didn't buy the Arizona Coyotes to stay there and be in a college and not make a lot of money. They bought this team hoping that they could move it somewhere.
No, they didn't. They did want this. This is the one ownership team that wanted to stay there.
Yeah, I don't know if they were going to stay in that spot.
They wanted
to stay in Arizona.
They wanted to stay in Arizona. That's all I'm saying.
That's what I'm saying too.
They wanted it
as the arena they're in.
They wanted it as part of a $1 billion real estate development.
Right.
That's the whole point.
Right, and they wanted to stay in Arizona, and I think they still do. But the problem is they're running out of time. Time is not on their side anymore.
Yeah.
Spent money on this. They failed. we talked about this a while back. I said the worst thing that could happen to this proposition was that a lot of people showed up at the polls, and a lot of people showed up. It was like 37%, something like that.
Yeah, the
very
wrong
high.
people showed up too for them.
Yeah, that's a lot.
Senior citizens came out. Whenever, in Michigan, whenever senior citizens show up, millages don't pass for school.
Right.
Like it just never happens, though.
Right.
And apparently the ownership of the Coyotes, in terms of a get out the vote campaign, put up a grand total of $250,000, whereas the anti Tempe, that group put up $2 million. So they really didn't put a lot of leverage, a lot of weight behind this. They hoped that they could almost like shame people into voting for it. It's like I don't know. All I know is you had and even if this thing with the Suns, because apparently if the Suns and the Coyotes got together, they would be building a building in Scottsdale. Okay, so you've got America West in the city, you've got Gila River in Glendale. Now you're going to build. This is the same argument I made when they were going to build a building in Tempe. You're going to have 3 arenas in a span of what? 25 square miles. It's asinine. It's like either.
Why is that asinine, Mike? I live in a city where there's 3 arenas within a quarter mile of each other.
I mean, I've got 2 within 15 miles.
But okay.
Little Caesars Arena, Ford Field, and Comerica Park.
No. But
it takes 5 minutes to walk to them.
In that instance, Kev, once for baseball, once for football, once for hockey. Here you're talking about 3 for hockey and basketball within the span of, they have University of Phoenix Stadium where Gila River is for, and I don't know where the Diamondback stadium is. That's fine. I'm talking about.
But they're trying to get out of that too, if you remember. So
yeah, but I mean the Pistons and Red Wings play in the same arena, and it would have been the same thing,
But I mean, the whole situation now, though. Okay, they'll move to, because there's some school of thought that the NHL will be as proactive as they were back in 2011 when Atlanta threw the keys on the table and moved Winnipeg. They did it in the span of a couple weeks. It was pretty quick.
You have to wait till the season ends, and you have to do it before the schedule gets written.
Well, first of all, the first time that they threw the keys in, Gary Bettman said he pushed him back and said, "This is not how it works." That's the first time it happened. And then at the end, they had given up. I mean, they had tried everything. And the final straw in Atlanta was, and, this has been written, but it's been a long time since people have talked about this. They couldn't get anybody in Atlanta to own the team. Like, nobody really wanted to do it. And finally, Bettman tried his hardest to keep it there, and he knew he had a sure thing in Winnipeg. So, he knew it would work. So he went there, and, once they got going, which is what would happen too if they ever wanted to go to Quebec. It's a very similar situation. The problem with going to Quebec is it's not even Quebec. First of all, the dollar is still weak, which is
that's a problem.
The Canadian dollar's problem. But it's also, it just screws up the East-West mess again. And then you're going to have a fight with some team that's going to have to go back out west. And, I guarantee you that the Illich family would.
Oh, it's not the Red Wings. I said that this morning. I know it's not.
It would,
it'd probably be Columbus or something like that. But you know what? They could do what they did with, remember, they'd already put the schedule together, and Winnipeg, it was Atlanta moving to Winnipeg. Winnipeg stayed in the Southeast Division for a year until they could move things around. They could do that until, if there's another expansion team, if
even this Atlanta group thinks they're going to do something. But my problem with the Atlanta group, Kev, is Atlanta is like home of the rappers, right? There's a lot of music people that live out there, a lot of money. It's interesting to me that Snoop Dogg, who probably has a home in Atlanta like a million other places, is sticking with the Ottawa route and not going with the Atlanta route. And so that tells me something. That tells me that A, it's closer, and B, he feels like this is more of a sure thing. And I have to agree with him. Like, I look at Atlanta and I say there's too many obstacles. Even if you have some funding in place, there's a ton of traffic. You've got to start and look, the fan base for the team that's there is decent, but you got to double that and hope that goes up every night. And that's
also Snoop Dogg knows hockey. So
Yeah.
he also knows the Senators actually have a talent laden
Yes.
Right.
players. So
Yeah.
Well, okay, and we don't have to spend a lot of time in this, but okay, a number of cities have been named as potential destinations. Okay, Russ mentioned Houston. To me, Houston makes the most sense because it's a top 10 television market. They have an arena that apparently is NHL capable, where the Rockets play. And as you said, Russ, they don't want to be a secondary tenant, but really, I don't know where they're going where they're not a secondary tenant.
Agreed.
So that in a short window here, if you're looking to move this team someplace else, if that's the only bad thing about moving them to Houston, then move them to Houston, because that's not a deal killer to me. Now to the NHL, it might be. Now, Kev, we talked about Salt Lake, and this all came from a meeting between Bettman and the owner of the Utah Jazz. Apparently, they're preparing a bid for the 2030 Winter Olympics. So they're going to try to get a new building built. I don't know whether the building that the Utah Jazz play in, whether that is NHL capable. I think it's the same building they played the 2002 Olympics in. So it would be because there was obviously a rink there. So, I mean, what do you think? First Houston, then Salt Lake.
Well, I think one of the reasons why they might be intrigued a little bit about it is visibility of the sport. Like, you like to be the only game in town, and, they don't have, football, in Salt Lake. So, or they don't have Major League Baseball there. So, it's just you and so I think they are interested in that. But it's just a guess on my part.
Now, Russ, the other ones, I mean, I would think that Atlanta, if they're going to go Atlanta, it's going to be expansion, and it's not going to be a team move, because I mean they've moved. They had the Flames there that flamed out. They had the Thrashers there that moved out. Unless they have the commitment from ownership to spend whatever. And maybe it's one of these ownership groups that fall short with the Senators. Maybe that would be what happens with them. Maybe that's what happens with the Coyotes. Maybe one of those groups buys the Coyotes. But I don't perceive Atlanta as being a destination as a move.
I think you gotta though move beyond what happened when. What year was that?
2011.
Okay, so that was 12 years ago. And look at where the price of franchises has gone. Mm-hmm. I think it's more about the ownership group,
right?
Like if they were convinced that they had, let's just say if Ryan Reynolds wanted to put a franchise in Atlanta, I think the NHL would be interested. I think it's. They've reached the point now where if you're just a big time ownership group, I think they're going to be really, really interested in you. It's not that the location doesn't matter, because it does, but I do think things have changed enough where Atlanta would be considered under the right circumstances.
Now, Russ, I swear to God, every time this comes up, we hear Kansas City's name being mentioned, and I never take that seriously, because I just don't think it's a non-starter for me. But they always bring it up.
This. I remember they had a game in 2022 in Wichita, and the attendance was 8,400, and they sold out, and that's nice. It's better than Arizona, what they currently have, but I don't think that's what the NHL should be aspiring for here. So even though that group did a good job, and Lamar Hunt Jr. is the owner, and you have all the right ingredients, you still need a bigger arena, because at the end of the day, the rest of the owners are going to look at this team and say, hey, your place is nice and you're charging more money, but look at the revenue gap between your team and the other 30 teams in the league. Like, it's just not, it's not enough.
And we're still a gate revenue driven league. Right. Like, the bulk of the revenue comes from, it's not like, the NFL where, they could play to empty stadiums and still be profitable.
Yeah. I mean, look, nobody's talking about the Arizona Inman experience. Nobody talked about that halfway into the season. People flocked there early in the season, and they may have had good attendance all season, but that whole little marketing thing wore off. Yeah. And for next season, it's not going to matter.
Yeah.
Like it's really, it may get some people there, but it's not going to, make the NHL money or those owners money or anybody else. So that's why I do think season's over before the draft. Maybe we're going to hear something. I think it could be pretty soon.
Unfortunately, the bad lighting at Mullet Arena didn't wear off. But Tony Soprano mentioned another. I heard Elliot Friedman talking this morning and mentioned Portland and Milwaukee and Sacramento. And the Sacramento is the first. That was the first I had ever heard of Sacramento being a potential destination. I mean, Portland makes a lot of sense, Kev, with the move to the Northwest. With that would with Seattle.
I like the idea of Portland.
Yeah. Now, again, I don't know whether the Trailblazers arena is NHL capable. Whether it has the setup for it.
They do have a hockey arena there, but it's not huge. Again,
yeah, it's where the Winterhawks play. So that's not. That's
it's new. I think it's only a couple of years old, but again,
So I mean, I just wonder whether this is the death knell or whether this is going to be like this is like The Walking Dead, and it's just going to keep going and keep they just perpetuate this. I would like to think that this is finally this is the headshot, and then finally something's going to happen where it moves. And because I just don't think right now anything's going to change. Maybe in a couple of years, maybe they move someplace else, they get ownership, and then they can be an expansion team to Arizona if the building is lined up. I don't know. I just don't think it's there.
I saw that
Browns, what the NFL did with the Browns.
Yeah, I saw that suggested on Twitter, and I think there is some logic to that as well. You just take a cleansing breath and move that team out of there, and then reconsider what to do there and look for the right ownership and the right opportunity to build an arena or to reach a partnership with the basketball team or whatever it is you want to do. I think all the options are on the table. Like, the one thing that we always lose sight of is that, there's three of us sitting around here trying to decide what to do with a multi-million-dollar business with, these things are really complicated. And, it's like, I remember doing a story on retraction years ago. And people used to throw around that, yeah, we're going to retract. Like, that's the easiest thing in the world. And I wanted the people, well, I guess that was off the record. But anyway, somebody important explained to me how that works. Well, it'd have to start like this. We'd have to go to all the owners, and everybody would have to dig in their pockets and pay off the guy we're trying to buy it. So at that point, it was $300 or $400 million. And he goes, so, everybody would have to put in a few $1 million. So we'd have to start there. And you want to do it with three teams. So, that's going to be hard. And he goes, and they may not want to do it. Then we're in lawsuits, we're in everything. Well, this is similarly complicated. They're going to go back to owners now, and they're going to try to say, well, you're going to have to move, or you're going to have to sell, or, and those owners are going to say, well, wait a minute, this is not what I signed up for. This is not what I want to do. I want to be guaranteed this, so there's going to be, it's not going to be clean.
Here's what I think Gary Bettman needs to do, Kev. I think the league needs to buy the team back from the Coyotes ownership, say, hey, thanks, we tried. It didn't work.
They can't do that without getting their agreement to do that. So
okay. So I wonder what's in their agreement. But let's say it's in their agreement.
Yeah.
The easiest way would be for them to do that, for them to sign on with Houston, and then find an owner that wants the Houston team. And then if that guy wants to build his own place like he will, then that will start to happen.
Yeah, I mean, we just recently saw this with the NBA. I mean, you can force somebody out, but that requires the league, and it's messy. It requires you to take a vote, and basically, it's
and with the NFL,
would vote to keep them there. I don't think they would.
And with the NFL with Daniel Snyder, they basically forced him to sell the team, but he's getting $4 billion for it. So I don't think he's complaining too much. What?
Yeah, no, but I'm just saying it's not as clean and tidy as you want. Like they're not going to decide this on a Tuesday, and like they're not going to get it done before the start of the season. Like anybody,
I think they could.
Not a chance.
Unless they planned for the fact that this vote was going to go down.
Think they may have planned for the.
Well, yeah, I mean, I guess that's a possibility, but we're 120 days from the start of training camp.
Well, what was the timing the last time? The timing the last time wasn't much
It happened
different.
after the Stanley Cup final in,
Yeah.
in June.
Yeah.
It's the
But then
same.
I don't
similar timing.
The one,
I'm just not sure you could do it. I mean, the game has changed so much in terms of, the way it's marketed, like the amount of money that you pay for television contracts. Like you think there's not
Well,
even
right now they may not even have a provider for TV. That might be a good thing.
so.
yeah, it
They
might
might-
be it might be Hofstra University. Oh, sorry, wait a second. That's
No, but you know what I mean. They may be part of the RSN.
Why wouldn't they have a TV?
Well, because that whole thing's in bankruptcy anyhow. So
yeah,
it's like,
Bally's, the Fox.
Oh no,
Bally's-
I'm talking about the national contracts.
Oh, okay.
So what I'm saying is, back then it wasn't such a big deal but now, with the television partners and everything that goes on, like it.
But I don't believe any of them would complain about having a team in Houston over Arizona. I just don't believe it. And
I don't think they'd complain. I think it would require some reworking of schedules and fitting of television place. I mean, it's a complicated deal.
Building availability wouldn't be the same.
I mean, if I know the NHL, they had to have had some sort of plan in place. I know that they wanted this and they were pushing for it and they thought it was going to happen, but they're smart enough to have a backup plan, and I think they did.
All right, couple things. We want to talk a little bit about some draft stuff near the end here, but Kev, there are a couple general manager spots that are open, Calgary and Pittsburgh. There are 5 coaching spots. One of them will not be New Jersey because Tom Fitzgerald came out today and confirmed that Lindy Ruff would be back as head coach of the Devils, and that's not a surprise since they got to the second round. That young team, there was the chanting of fire Lindy, and then they had that fantastic start and a pretty good year. So that's sort of solidified. The interesting thing here now is like the openings in other places, coaching and GM. Pittsburgh is the one that's very interesting right now. After Kyle Dubas essentially took himself out of the running for any other job other than Toronto, the list of names in Pittsburgh has been sort of far afield, from Jason Karmanos with the Sabres, assistant GM of the Sabres, to Eric Tulsky from Carolina. And one name that was mentioned, and I mentioned sort of in passing yesterday, was John Chaika. And John Chaika is apparently in the mix for the Penguins job too. What have you heard on that Penguins?
Yeah, I had heard that as well, that they brought him in. I mean, he is a kind of as much, like everyone likes Dubas around the league, and they like his analytical approach. And of course, Chaika, that's where he made his name, is for his analytical approach. So, he can certainly talk a good game. I got to know him pretty well when I was at USA Today. He's a pretty likable guy, and
very approachable.
And I'm pretty sure he interviews well. So, the other guy in Pittsburgh that you're hearing a lot of is Botterill.
Botterill makes the most sense to me.
Yeah, I mean, was there a very long time. He understands the marketplace. It didn't work in Buffalo, but does he deserve another kick at the can? Because everyone thought he was just a sure thing. Like, anybody who knows him knows. I run into him all the time because he lives in the Michigan area, and he was always at the Red Wings game. So, we were always with that. I mean, he's very knowledgeable guy. And even though the people that were in charge of Pittsburgh are now gone, when he was there, people that were in charge when he was there, I think everyone's well aware of his connection there and the fact that he had spent a dozen years there, and he'd kind of learned the game there. So I would think he would be in the mix. I would think, like I said, Chaika can be pretty impressive. But how are they going to view what he did? I mean, he cheated. I guess he paid his price. Like, he lost his job and everything else. So it'd be interesting.
It's like trading for Jose Altuve. We know he's a cheater, but he's a great player.
Well, but here's my argument back, Kev. Everybody who cheated with the Astros all have jobs now in Major League Baseball again.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah.
So here's the funny thing. I thought about Botterill, not on the show that I was on this morning because it just didn't come to me, but I saw Jason Botterill a couple weeks ago before the Flyers season ended. And, and it dawned on me that, he's still out there. He's a smart guy. He's a Harvard guy. and he has a Pittsburgh background. So while Tulsky is the fashionable name, it could still end up being Botterill. But the one thing I could say with, I think, great certainty is Sullivan's going nowhere. All these articles being written that Mike Sullivan may end up here, or Mike Sullivan, he's going nowhere.
Yeah, no. He came out today like he because there was all these rumors about him going to the Rangers and
it's just
pipe dream. Randy in the chat brings it up, and honestly, I think this is so weak.
Randy who?
Flamester. Wait,
no,
Randy.
I'm kidding. That was his joke.
Yeah, it really went over like a lead balloon there, Russ. But Brad Treliving, who was let go by the Calgary Flames, they won't give him permission to talk to Pittsburgh. Now, is it because of the draft and they don't want him to share draft information until, his contract doesn't end until June 30th and the draft is, I think, June 27th and 28th. So then, if that's what it is, then okay, fine. But it just seems pretty weak. The guy that you decided to part ways with, you're not going to give permission for him to have a chance at another job, Kev. I think that's
yeah, it's weak. I'm with you on that. I don't particularly care for that. I don't like it. And although I'm sure not the end of the world. If Pittsburgh was really interested in him, like it wouldn't, I don't think hurt the process for them to say we're not going to decide till after the draft. So.
Right.
Now, Russ, you wanted to talk about, we've seen some mock drafts, and every single one, unless it's just something completely out of, completely detached from reality, has Bedard 1 and Fantilli 2. But now we've seen a couple where they have Smith as the third pick instead of Leo Carlsson.
So here's what I could say. I've seen him 6 times live this year. I went back and looked at my viewings too, right? And Leo Carlsson, I have not had the great pleasure of seeing as much. I've seen him more on video than live. Actually, I've only seen him once live if I've seen him at all, now that I think about it. So, but the thing is this. I think there's a lot of recency bias with Will Smith and the under-18 World Championships. And Will Smith is a great talent. But when I look at it, Will Smith is a tremendous center. Now, he's on the best line in junior hockey as far as, the USA line. I get it. He's a quick strike guy, so sometimes he won't do anything for a few periods, and all of a sudden he'll get an assist and a goal and lead you the right way. He could, weave his way in through traffic. He's really good with that, and he's a good two-way guy. The only thing is Will Smith is not like the overall physical specimen that Leo Carlsson is, who also happens to have many of the same gifts that Will Smith has. And so if you want to say Smith is a little faster, okay, I'll give it to you. When Carlsson weaves through traffic, he's already weaving through men where he's playing in the SHL and now in the World Championships. I don't put too much stock in the World Championships because they play hard, but hardish. But he's still, he does that through men all the time. And at the end of the day, I still would go with Carlsson simply because I feel he's got all the same tools that Smith does. And now this is where size matters a little bit, like body type, size. I'm going to go with that because I think he could impact more of the overall game than even Smith, who is a terrific player. But I think once you start pushing him up to 3, then I think that's where he loses, his battle.
Yeah, I read the McKenzie piece about the fact that there was someone, and I went to 2 people who are decision makers in the scouting world and asked them about that. And one of them said, we wouldn't spend 5 minutes of my draft time comparing the 2 players. And we love Smith, he said.
Right.
But
yeah.
Carlsson, he said, is just a more superior physical specimen.
Yep.
And what they really liked about him is his ability to handle the puck in traffic.
Yeah.
Like
he's amazing at it.
Yeah. And he said, so we wouldn't, he says, I know who the one scout is who thinks he's better. And, that's his prerogative. And he said, a lot of people who saw him were even more impressed about Smith when they saw him, I guess, at the under 18 as well. He said, but it didn't change anyone's mind. He said, he said it wouldn't even, he said, I don't think there's really even any debate. I bet that one scout can't even convince his GM to, he said, I would be hard pressed to say that. He said, he said, that's not demeaning Smith, he said, I'd love to get him at 3,
Right.
But again, comparables and statistics at certain levels sometimes can be misleading. When you have an 18-year-old Carlson who's playing full time in the SHL, who scored 25 points as an 18-year-old, I can't ignore that. I'm not saying, and it's not casting aspersions on Smith. I mean, if he's not number 3 after Bedard and Fantilli, I'd be stunned. I mean, if it's not Columbus taking him, or maybe somebody who trades up with Columbus to get him, for Columbus to trade down. I'm far from being a draft expert, but I just look at his qualifications and what he's done and say, he's got to be 3. I'd be shocked.
A real draft argument. If you want the real draft argument, when you hit 4 and you want to argue between Michkov, Benson, and Smith, I'm all in for that argument, because there's a lot of different reasons why a lot of teams would go with this guy or that guy or the other guy. I think there's a certain amount of volatility, and I think San Jose picks in that spot. And I think there's a certain amount of volatility there. Now, again, I think when Greer said he has no problem taking Michkov, that Michkov's off the table for them. So I think it would be between like Smith and Benson. I do.
Well, maybe that's a play for. Well, I'd take them, and hey, Washington, how about?
Yeah, I mean, maybe, but I just didn't think it was sincere. I just didn't buy it as sincere.
Yeah, and they always say that. Yeah,
right.
But it's amazing to me that here we are 30 years later. And this is almost like the Yager argument from 1990, when it was Yager was the better player, but it was his availability. What was going to happen there, and when would it be, and where I can't even remember who the player was, but you could get him sooner and get him in your system and all that stuff, and that's what we're saying here. 27, 28 does seem like a long time.
You know what it is, Kev? I think it was a factor then, but I think it's a bigger factor now that some teams want to sell this pick right away to their fan base, even if they're a year away. But they want to sell it, and if somebody gets Michkov, you're going to get a weekend's worth of advertising out of it, and then he's going to Russia for the next 3 years, unless you're Washington, and maybe you can cut that in half or something. But that's what's going to happen. So your basic time with that kid to market it to your fan base is very limited. But if you get Carlson and he is going to play out the SHL season and will come over at the end of the season for the AHL, you could start really putting him out in front with your fan base and say, you're going to see this guy in this calendar year. And, there are some teams that would rather do that than wait. And I don't think it's the right way to do it, but it's not my business. Like, if you want to do that, that's up to you.
Yeah,
well, I think you got to do it in today's world. I mean, you got to sell hope.
Yeah.
It's a multi-million-dollar business, and you got to be able to have, or you at least got to have a good marketing plan to try to convince fans that that's the right choice and why. You can't just do it and say let the chips fall where they may.
That's true.
Yager was 5th in the 90 draft after Owen Nolan, Peter Nedved, Keith Primo, and Mike Ricci.
Yeah. Well,
if I remember right, and again, who knows what I was doing at that time. I was like, I was really into the business world, but into hockey. But I kind of remember Nolan having a tremendous amount of draft buzz. He is going to be like an unbelievable superstar. And, but fell short.
Injuries hurt him.
Yeah,
but I covered that draft, and what the story was, there were a lot of people who said, Yager's the best player.
Okay,
but we're not going to take.
We're not taking the chance.
Yeah, because we just don't know. Like when's he going to be there? So I mean, the people knew how good he was, and but they just weren't really sure of how that was going to work out. So.
Last thing, Kev, Edmonton had their media availability today. Ken Holland has a year left in his contract. There are some who believe he's going to finish out next year and retire. Some believe he might get kicked up to president of hockey operations, and they hire a GM. I mean, it doesn't sound like there's going to be any change to what his current role is in Edmonton, but he's had a long and distinguished career, so it's going to be interesting to see what happens.
What did he say about the goaltending? Anything?
I didn't. I only saw the update on his status. Nothing about the goaltending situation. I'll dig in further and we can talk about it tomorrow. But
is Ken Holland going to come out of retirement and play goal? Is that what you're saying?
is he going to bring in Grant Fuhr and Andy Moe?
I know he's an old goalie, but
well, I mean, obviously. And I'm looking here. I didn't see anything, but just touching on that briefly again, I don't blame them going back to Skinner. Obviously, it didn't have positive effects. They ended up losing, and every time Campbell came in, he played well in relief. But the way he played during the season, the trust level for Campbell was not there, and they,
I think
maybe
you're right about that. I think that did show, but they're not going to be able to shop Campbell.
No.
And so, their goalie situation is going to be the same. They just need to get better on defense.
They have a $5 million backup next year.
Yeah,
or
10. Defense. I think they've got one more year with Connor McDavid, the same way that Ken Holland's got one more year. I think the minute Ken Holland leaves, if they haven't made it to the Stanley Cup, I think Edmonton's in trouble with McDavid. That's just, I don't know, Kev. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think he is going to get frustrated, but I talked about this the other day when I talked to an agent about that. He said, "Well, that's the way it always used to be, and it still's that way to a certain extent. But the biggest problem now is it's so hard to figure out where you should go to get that chance." That's what he said. He said, then all of a sudden it becomes now. I don't think Connor McDavid's married, is he? So
girlfriend.
Yeah. So the other things aren't as important to him, but does he like his teammates? Does he like the city? Does he, is it hard on him to play there? Those are issues too.
Well, let me ask you this question. Let's say McDavid is contemplating staying there and wants to be the highest paid guy in the league, which he probably will. Don't you think that means then they'd have to get rid of Draisaitl at that point?
I don't, because the cap's going to grow. They from what I hear, they've had a really, really good year revenue wise.
So you think that if McDavid's making, I don't know, we'll throw out a number, 12, 15, that they're going to give Draisaitl 12?
Yeah, I do.
Wow.
I mean, if the cap is growing, I mean, one of the things.
This is only a couple years away. This is 3 years away.
No, let me ask this, Kev, because the gap between Draisaitl and McDavid right now is $4 million. Draisaitl's making 8.5. McDavid's making 12.5. McDavid deserves to be the highest paid player in the league. But if I'm Draisaitl, I've been underpaid for 6-7 years. I will not make it up. You'll never make it up. I at least want to be like Taves and Kane in Chicago and be paid the same as McDavid, because I'm a star player in the same right now.
Yeah, but don't you think he knows that Connor McDavid has a little more pizzazz,
Yeah.
So I think he's aware of that. I think if you offered him $12 million, I don't think he would feel insulted. I mean, maybe what, I don't know. But, it's hard. It was hard to know at the time of Kane and Taves who was the better player.
Right.
Because Taves had the leadership issue, and it isn't, at least in my mind, who the better player is between Connor McDavid and Draisaitl is.
Do we have a guess at what the cap's going to be in 3 years?
Well, I mean, that's what big people have said in 90. And, I always had this conversation. I always love these conversations, and the fan base does not like to hear all these, but it really is fascinating how everybody looks at it. And, he lectured me on the idea of how general managers look at the cap. He said, first of all, if you go and look, he said every team has 6 or 7 guys that are making $1 million or less. And
right.
He said some even go higher. They like to have 8 guys or whatever. He said, I view it as 6 or 7. So now all of a sudden, instead of roster being at 23, if you take 7, you're down to 16. So I have 16, and you take $7 million off the cap. So we're going to get to 90. So that cap's going to be $83 million. So really, when I think of the average salary, I think of the average salary of 83 divided by 16. Like he said, that's how I view it. And he says what that really means is, the average really is about $5 million, somewhere in that range is what you're paying. So he said, I divide it between, I pay 4 guys, a bulk of the money. And then, I want to make sure I have a balance between my offense and my defense. And that's how I view it. And he said, so I think you can afford to have, 4 guys making a lot of money.
So I just looked it up. Like in 2009, 2010, the Rangers were the highest payroll team at over 63. They were like 63 and change. So, you figure with inflation and everything else, I think 90's kind of close to what it was then. But I still, man, I mean, if they gave them that much money, do the quick math, Mike. I mean, how much is those 2 guys the percent to the cap? If you're giving them like 27 million and it's 90, so that's like almost a third.
It's almost
27%.
15-16% each.
Yeah, that's almost a third of the cap, Kev. I get what you're saying about the 8 or 9 guys, but man, to me that's right on the borderline. It's not impossible, but that's right on the borderline.
I mean, how much was Taves and Kane a percentage of the Blackhawks at 10 million?
I think the difference there was they always had a cheap goalie for whatever reason, and they did though. I mean,
Well, they did, but you can't count on that.
Well, later on, Corey Crawford made $5 million.
Yes.
Remember with Taves and Kane, there was the 3-year entry level deal. Then
Right.
they were making 7.5 for 5 years. They had a 5-year bridge.
Right.
Then they made the 10.5.
Right.
So
that doesn't change the raw numbers for the impact on the cap, though.
No, at the end. But in fact, when they were making 10.5, it was almost like they started making that at the height, and then as they were going down, it became worse and worse because they weren't as great contributors as they were.
Yeah, but I mean, we've all heard general managers in all sports talk about that. You have to look at the final number. That's the way they view it.
Okay.
Like it doesn't bother them to pay people when they're not producing because they benefited because they were much more valuable at the start of it. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
I mean, really, like Connor McDavid is already a $15 million player. You know what I mean? In terms of his real value.
Right.
So like they don't really kind of see it that
here's
way.
what I would say about the Blackhawks. They definitely had a better farm system than what Edmonton has now, and as far as being able to call up guys and have those cheaper players. But even Crawford at his 5, goalies were still making a lot of money then, and there were probably 8 or 9 goalies making more money than him.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, you always have to sort of manipulate your roster. I mean, that comes with part of being the job. But I don't think you could say a blanket rule. Oh, you can't have somebody making $30 million. Well, if you got 2 of the top 5, I think you can.
Well, if you do that, though, I think if that happens, then they're going to be cutting out more. So then, like Nugent Hopkins coming off his career year, his next payday, he might be the guy that gets cut out.
See, I don't think that, not necessarily. I mean, it could be just like it is now. Like, I mean, they're going to grow by 10 million.
And they're never going to win. They're never going to win.
Well, the cap, I mean, there are teams that are winning that, have to, one team can win and that's, they made the right decisions on their cap. But there are, the Tampa Bay Lightning, what percentage did those top 4 players have on their payroll?
Not as high as Toronto.
Not as high because they had the advantage of the Florida state tax.
Right.
And Stamkos taking 8.5 when he was offered 10 or 10.5 from Toronto, but tax implications, the 8.5 was actually more than the 10.5 in Toronto. So
it could happen. It could happen, but I don't think we're at the point yet in the cap era where we've seen like 2 or 3 players, or even 4, like in Toronto, take up the percentage of the cap that they do and actually win the Stanley Cup. We haven't really seen.
I don't know. I'm going to look this up right now, but I think you're wrong on that. I think their percentage of their top even 5 guys was really high because I've had this argument before and people have brought this up to me.
And the problem in Toronto is you have 4 forwards making almost 50% of their cap.
Right.
When it's not, there most teams out there, they'll have 4 players that total 50% of the cap, but it's 2 forwards and 2 defensemen, or 2 forwards, a defenseman, and a goalie. With Toronto, it's 4 forwards, and if those forwards don't score, then you're in trouble.
I don't even know why we're talking about Toronto, Mike. We're talking about Edmonton.
As the percentage of cap example, that's
but I'm just saying that, if you're going to pay them $27 million and say it's 1/3, now if you can get a defenseman and another defenseman at $8 million, and your goalie is at $6 million or whatever, you can make it work. Okay, so when they won their last cup, so Kucherov was at 9.5, 9.5, 19, 27. Then Stamkos was at 8.5. So
Hedman was at 7.5.
27.5. No. Hedman was at 7.8.
7.8.
So 7.9. So 27.5. So 35, 100,000, 125,000 short of 35. And then who was their 5th guy?
Point.
So, oh no, it was Vasilevsky, because I knew it was. So he's at 9.5.
And did they all play that year, or did one of them miss the year because of cap circumvention?
They all played that year. Okay. Yeah. So that's 45. So, and they had 80 million. So they actually were 45 million on an $80 million cap in their last cap year.
Right.
I mean,
that was 5 players.
Players, but still, I mean, that's a big chunk of it.
It is a big chunk. I think, though, I think I'm overstated too much, and I think you're making it seem too easy that it's easy to piece that together.
Well, no, it's not easy, but it can be done. I don't think my only point is, when it comes to salary caps, unlike the way Mike views it and the way you just presented it, it's never cut and dry. It depends on the personnel. When you have 2 guys, I think we can all say that Draisaitl and Connor McDavid are in the top 5 players.
No question.
At least in terms of to have 2 of those guys, I think you can do something like that. Like say, okay, we're just going to dedicate 1/3 of our money to those guys, and then you work around those 2, just because you got something no one else has. No one else is going to have 2 in the top 5.
I mean, Pittsburgh did, and
they did,
and they won because of Fleury, because they had those 2 guys and they had Fleury. That's the part. To me, it's the missing ingredient in Edmonton is they don't have that top 5 goalie.
No, I mean, but that's management failure. That's not a failure of them deciding to give those 2 guys money. That's my only point.
Those players earned that money in these playoffs. McDavid had 20 points. Draisaitl had 12 goals. That again, that's the argument against what's going on with the blue and white, because the $40 million guy, the 4 guys, $40 million didn't show up against Florida. So we'll talk about that again next time. Not sure if our show is going to be tomorrow or Friday, but we'll be back sometime this week with another edition of the Hockey Buzzcast. For Kevin Allen, for Russ Cohen, I'm Michael Agello. Thank you for watching, and remember, without the buzz, it's just hockey.